So how is your faith? Serious question. Think about it. Hi fam, welcome back to my channel. If you're new, welcome. My name is Akubeze and I'm a Christian content creator based in Lagos, Nigeria. Back with another episode of my faith series in which we are studying the greats in the Hall of Faith, which is contained in Hebrews 11. So just call this a Bible study of Hebrews 11. And each week we are going through the different characters that are mentioned, and we are going to be deep diving into their stories and picking up on things that we can learn about their faith. So this week our focus was to study the faith of Abel. It's mentioned in Hebrews 11:4, and his story is contained in Genesis 4. So I hope you did the assignment, because I'm not reading the whole of Genesis 4. I'm just going to focus on the particular verses that stood out to me. But first of all, we're going to start off by deep diving into Hebrews 11:4. As usual, I copied my 3 different translations, NIV, NLT, ESV, and just highlighted the things that stood out to me. So NIV says that by faith, Abel brought God a better offering than Cain. By faith, he was commended as righteous when God spoke well of his offerings, and by faith, Abel still speaks, even though he is dead. NLT says it was by faith that Abel brought a more acceptable offering to God than Cain did. Abel's offering gave evidence that he was a righteous man, and God showed his approval of his gifts. Although Abel is long dead, he still speaks to us by example of his faith. And ESV says, by faith, Abel offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain, through which he was commended as righteous, God commending him by accepting his gifts, and through his faith, though he died, he still speaks. So you can basically summarize the things that stood out about Abel's faith. First of all is that he brought a better offering, a more acceptable offering, a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain. And secondly, because of that offering, he was commended as righteous. His offering gave evidence that he was a righteous man. The offering, because God accepted his offering, it showed his righteousness essentially. And lastly is that by faith, he is still speaking, even though he is dead. So now let's deep dive into the story to really understand those 3 elements of his faith. And to deep dive, we are going into Genesis 4. But let me just give a bit of summary before I get into those verses. So if you read the chapter, you will see that this chapter is essentially sharing the genealogy of Adam and Eve. So Adam and Eve had Cain first, then Abel, and then it outlines the story of how Cain and Abel both brought offerings, but Abel's offering was better, and so Cain killed Abel. And then it just outlines Cain's children, and then it now shares that Adam and Eve eventually had another child, Seth, who from Seth came Enosh, and then we're going to continue on with the story. But basically, so from verse 4 to 10 outlines the particular portion which is of relevance to us today, which is the sacrifice, the offering that was made, and how it was more acceptable. It says, now Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. And again she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain was a worker of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel also brought the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. Cain was very angry, and his face fell. So the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry, and why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it. Cain spoke to Abel his brother, and when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, where is Abel your brother? He said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? And the Lord said, what have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. Now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. We'll stop there. So, we are told that Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel brought the firstborn of his flock and their fat portions. And so at that point, you're reminded of the verse that we studied last week that talks about whoever wants to draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who diligently, sincerely seek him, earnestly seek him, like seek him with care. You can tell that there is a distinction between Abel's offering and Cain's offering, because Abel's offering, it is said that is the firstborn of his flock, and secondly, it is said that it is the fat portions, whereas with regards to Cain's offering, it is just said that he brought some fruits, nothing fantastic. He brought an offering of the fruits. There's no specification given to let us know what made that fruit stand out. Like, it just seemed like it was anyhow kind of fruits that he gave him, and that's why, the takeout for me in this regard is like, in our faith walk, we have to be careful about it. Like, it has to be with sincerity, it has to be with earnestly. We have to give God our best, basically. So the next thing that we're told about Abel's faith is that, God spoke well of his offering. He was commended as righteous because of his offerings. And you see in verse 7, it says that when the Lord was speaking to Cain in verse 6 and 7, he told him, "Why are you angry and why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door, and its desire is to rule over you, but you must rule over it." And so it takes us back to remind us that God is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. He accepted Abel's offering because he could see the diligence, he could see the earnestness. But Cain, his offering was not accepted because he didn't do well. It wasn't counted as righteousness. He didn't receive God's commendation or his approval from his offering. Lastly, it tells us that through faith, though he died, he still speaks. And this is a point that I was stuck on, because in my mind, I started thinking to myself, are you telling me that the reward of faith is death? Like, how is it that this guy is commended by God? He's done the right thing. He's given God his best. And in the next verse, they are telling us that his brother killed him. And you read the whole of chapter 4 and you see that, God did not immediately punish his brother. Of course, he punished him, casted him out or whatever, but he still had mercy on him and put a mark on him so nobody would kill him. So to me, I was like, you're even being merciful to the murderer, and then the guy who was of faith dies. But two things. First of all, I now started thinking to myself that as believers, we always say that to die is gain. Like, our reward is not here on this earth. The ultimate reward is to be reunited with God and, to be living in eternal bliss in heaven. And so we can't have this earthly perspective or this, physical mindset. Like, remember when we were talking about how faith is not seen, essentially, like our faith is not based on what is seen. So our faith should not also be based on physical manifestation of our rewards, even though obviously the human in me is already telling God, I know that one, but I still want my physical reward. But it's a reminder that the reward of faith is not physical. It's not what we can see. Like, we don't see how Abel was rewarded by his death. In the physical, that makes no sense. But in the spiritual, that makes sense, because he went to God, he's with God, and it even says that though he died, he still speaks. So the second thing is that he still speaks, but it is not, of course, he spoke, his blood was crying out, his blood spoke, and God held his brother accountable. But beyond that, his blood spoke because it's still speaking to us. We're still learning lessons from his faith, and he still counted in this hall of faith because of what he did. And so there's a bigger picture behind what he said. And ESV, like I said, highlighted some verses, and it says in Hebrews 12 verse 24 that Jesus is the mediator of the new covenant unto the sprinkled blood, which speaks a better word than the blood of Abel, because the blood of Abel did speak of vengeance, and the blood of Jesus speaks of redemption and hope. So I love the comment that Real Vibes TV left, which says that, for instance, if someone has faith in a cause, their dedication, work, and commitment to that cause are visible expressions of their faith. Similarly, religious faith can be seen in the way individuals live their lives according to their beliefs, engage in rituals, and treat others. These outward manifestations provide tangible evidence of an internal faith. I love that line. These outward manifestations provide tangible evidence of an eternal faith. You know, there was nothing obvious about Abel's faith until it came to his offering. And in that regard, of course, his faith was seen, but we could not see what he based his faith on. Why did he decide to honor God that way? And it's really just a heart posture as far as I'm concerned. And even though his reward in a way was to die and to be joined with God, I'll just sum it up as NLT said, that although Abel is long dead, he still speaks to us by example of his faith. I appreciate the example that he gave us about giving God your best, about how you will be commended by God by what you do for him. And even though it's death, it still speaks. Even though it's death, it still has an impact. So we're going to continue on by studying the life of Enoch, whose story is contained in Hebrews 11:5 and Genesis 5 from verse 21 to 25. So I shall see you next week. I love you, but never forget Jesus loves you the most. Bye.